On this week's episode, I invite Jason Liebig, candy collector, historian, and overall really interesting guy, to take a seat at my virtual bar. Jason has done so many things in his life and has so many stories that we had to turn this episode into a two-parter. Here in part one, we talk about his background in the comic book business, his TV show that was, and the movie that almost was. So grab a drink, kick back, and enjoy part one of my conversation with Jason Liebig. You're listening to the Unemployed Bartender Podcast with your host, Keith Carter.
They've already clicked off of the show.
You know, I haven't listened to many podcasts.
For your listeners, you do realize this, right?
Yeah, I don't know. What else do you want to talk about?
Do you put like little outtakes in the intro of your podcast?
All of this can be cut out. This pretty much just a podcast. New episodes every Friday. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the UB Podcast. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Unemployed Bartender Podcast. I am joined today by Mr. Jason Liebig.
Yes, that's correct.
Or at Collecting Candy, as you're probably most, at least on Instagram, at least.
Yes, that's true.
Also at www.collectingcandy.com.
Yes.
Mr. Liebig is a New York City-based writer, editor, and sometimes an actor.
Yes, well, not so much anymore, but yeah, that was accurate at the time.
Upon a time.
Yeah.
And I would be remiss not to, this is something we kind of discussed earlier on the phone, that I did want to take some time out of our episode to kind of discuss some of the things that have been going on. It's been a very, very heavy day for a lot of people. For me, there was a point where I was kind of questioning whether or not I wanted to do this show or not today, or kind of push it. But I decided I did want to, go ahead and at least take some time to kind of discuss some of the stuff that's going on for everyone that's listening. I'm sure you know by now there was another unarmed African-American man who was gunned down by police this past week. And then today, we found out last night that there was an armed militia men, I guess, whatever you want to call it, that was a 17-year-old trying to, I guess, who looked up to police and was trying to do, I feel bad for this kid because this kid is not old enough to make his own decisions and make his own things. Like but he did like one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen. And that's how I woke up this morning. So it's been just like a very, heavy sigh day. And then of course, as we're recording this in a couple hours, the Category 4 hurricane is going to hit the coast of Louisiana and Texas.
Just what they need.
Of COVID and civil unrest and everything else that's going on in this world. It's a lot. This is going to be a really fun episode in like 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But I did, like I said, I wanted to make sure that we took that time to kind of talk about that. What do you think?
Well, look, we're coming to grips with a lot of things. Here we are, what do you say? I've had so many conversations about this, not debates, but discussions with people who parse things out a little differently. People I think that don't want to believe. I was having a conversation, through Facebook messages with a friend of mine from grade school. And I grew up in Nebraska, in a small town, pretty much all white. And, he had posted all this very big thing about 2 weeks ago, and it was, it was very sort of anti-social justice or whatever. And, he was fed up and he felt like he couldn't say the things he wanted to say or whatever. And I always found this guy to be one of the most honorable people I knew growing up. And so I was like, this breaks my heart, Yeah, and this is a guy I looked up to. And I was going to respond, but I feel like getting dragged into public Facebook debates is not pointless, but oftentimes is pointless. And I'm one of those people that if I get into that, it's almost like a bad drug. Like I want to keep coming back and saying, and trying to deconstruct the wrong things the other person was saying. And of course, 99.99% of the time that's pointless because no one's really listening. Anyway, I wrote him a personal message and I just said, listen, I understand why you feel the way you feel, and went on. And as I was writing it, I was sort of working some things out on myself. And it was this idea, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and, and I grew up in a fairly liberal household in a fairly conservative state. I didn't realize it was a conservative state until I was in college because I just didn't.
Sheltered and
I just thought everybody saw the way of the world I did, it's just like, and I really had the naivete to believe. And when I told him, I said, look, probably like me, you thought when I was 13 years old or 15 years old that we had the civil rights, we had the civil rights stuff in the 60s. Martin Luther King marched. People, there were bad people, who wanted to keep people from getting their rights. But then we passed laws, people were killed, and we solved it, right? Because I was sitting there watching, the Jeffersons and, like equality was ostensibly the message out in the media, right? That we were all equal. And, I'm a white guy, I moved to New York City, so I don't see a lot of it, but boy, the last years, the more you learn, like hell, I didn't even know about the Tulsa massacre until Watchmen on HBO, which is embarrassing,
Which is that's tragic.
Yeah.
That there is something as beautiful as a Black Wall Street that was, where they had found something, created something for themselves, by themselves, and then made it amazing. And then to have, whomever come and destroy it all and then cover it up and then not tell anybody about it, never talk about it. There's people that live in Tulsa, Oklahoma,
that
have taken history classes that had no clue after taking Oklahoma history that there was a massacre in their city, which is a travesty.
Yeah. And I understand, look, we don't all know everything.
Yeah.
But, look, I'm patriotic, right? Whatever. I love America. I love this ideal of America. And yet, look, there was a point at which I was a young man and I realized, I said, look, if another country is better at America than us, like I remember during the 80s, it was like, well, that Japanese must be cheating, right? Because they're making better cars, but then they're selling more than Fords and GMs. So they must somehow be cheating, right? And this idea all of a sudden struck me. I said, well, what if they're just better at it than we are, right? Yeah. And there's this sort of idea that if you acknowledge that, you're being unpatriotic, right? Like if you acknowledge that we have flaws, like that's unacceptable. And I thought, wow, and like I say that because I also know people who also wouldn't acknowledge flaws of themselves. And I said, well, look, I think it's noble to acknowledge flaws in yourself and hopefully you can improve,
That's the only way you can possibly.
Hopefully.
If you don't know that they exist, then you're not really doing much work to fix it.
And don't get me wrong. I know that it's maybe not necessarily productive to only focus on the worst parts of yourself and maybe on the worst parts of our history. I mean, look, we were a country, we had a constitution talking about all men are created equal, and we literally bought and sold human beings. Slavery, it was probably
at the same time.
Yes. No, that's the great irony of this, right? How can you, I very much love the Constitution, even the parts that make it, that are troubling for me, that guarantee some rights that maybe I'm it's a really well written document, and yet there's just this crazy irony. How can you even take this thing seriously if we bought and sold human beings? It's literally insane.
Yeah, if this was a legal contract, it would be null and void for violating one of the first things that we said in the contract.
And so, I've often said, one of the great things about the Constitution, about our form of government, is I said revolution is built into the system, meaning you can amend the Constitution, you can pass laws, you can do these things. We have democracy, we have representation.
That's the one true beauty in the democracy and the thing is that when you fuck up, you can fix it.
Ostensibly,
you don't have to live in that mistake.
Yes. And so you can do that. And so there was this thing in the 60s. It was America, love it or leave it. And that is a message that I hear in various ways still repeated today, right? Love it or leave it, love it or leave it. I'm like, man, that's not America.
Especially conservative America.
Yeah, it's not love it or leave it. It's love it or change it. Love it or make it better.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the beauty of what we are. It's that we're not the same country we were 200 years ago or 100 years ago or 50 years ago, thank goodness. And look, no matter what side of a political aisle you're going to find as you get older, the world's going to become less and less familiar. At a certain point, you're going to be like, man, I don't get it. I don't like this. But that's it, man. That's life.
Yeah.
And you just hope it gets, you hope it gets more equitable. You hope it gets more just. And like I said, I thought at 17 years old, my naive young personhood, I thought we had solved it. And then you start to find out there are these very complex systems, that are generational and they're problematic, and they create this sense, they're not even overtly evil. They're just some of them, I mean, are obviously they come from
some of them are definitely
some of them are, but some of them are opportunistic for people of one race, and then they take opportunities away from it. But even if you solve that problem, even if you say now everyone's equal, but you still got the generations, and I'm not talking like 100 years. We're talking about the stuff that went on in Levittown, post World War II. It's just, there's so much of that stuff.
The number of people that don't know about blockbusting, redlining, things that occur, they're just core tenets of mostly white communities, because they created those mostly white communities by forcing people of color to go live somewhere else and not allowing them. I mean, and so this is,
and so when I'm going back to this Facebook message, I'm talking to my friend, and I'm trying to imagine myself in his head, because I think he believes it. He believes that we all have the same opportunities, right? He says the system is fair. And, I get it. The first time I heard the term white privilege, I was super resistant to the term. I was like, well, it's just perspective, man. It's like, I get it. I'm white. I have more opportunities. But if I was 6'1" and looked like Brad Pitt, I'd also have more privilege than I currently have. Yeah. But
that's called Brad
privilege, or the beauty bubble, you have pretty people, like everything is handed to them. But I guess I've come around to it because it is perspective. It is perspective, and it is the opportunities you're given. And the whole thing is, there's guys like me. It's like, well, I've been treated unfairly. I get it. I've been treated unfairly too, but there's such a systemic thing attached to being white or being a person of color that I think it's helpful to have a label for it. Now, I know it's very provocative. It's very triggering in a lot of ways. People get defensive, especially people white people who've struggled their whole lives,
Yes.
Because they're like, well, fuck,
those are the ones that have the hardest time. It's like, where's my privilege?
Yeah, like, what are you talking about? I grew up in a trailer park, it's just like my father was dead, and it's like my mother worked 3 jobs. It's like that. Where was the privilege there? And it's hard to understand exactly what it is being described.
Well, you didn't get shot on the way home. You weren't constantly followed in every store that you walked into. There's lots of things that people who don't have their eyes open to the situation, which is most people in small towns, because there's no point in opening. Like for a long time, still to this day, a lot of them don't have the same access to information that we do in cities. Like in these small towns, they're still on dial-up or satellite internet. It's not like it's not the
even
same
if
thing.
you did, I mean, look, we've never had more access to information than we do now. And people are no less than they ever did. And, you know, it's the algorithms of Google searches. It's the algorithms of Facebook feeding you what you already agree with, you know, in a way.
Well, because we have the access to all information, it's very easy to find self-affirming information because it's out there. Like for everything that's out there, the exact opposite of that thing exists equally as present and available to you if that's what you want to look at. You can just look at that and then never know anything else. And that's a huge problem.
And the digital systems which feed you the information start to customize it for you, even if you're not trying. You know, even if you're looking, even if you're trying to look outside your bubble, you're still going to get directed. You know,
they're designed to point you into the funnel of your own thoughts and ideals because that's the best way to monetize you.
And regarding like police pulling over black people too much and all this other stuff, you know, and look, I hear these things. Well, if you just comply with the officers and everything, and look, you know. Look, that I was told as a young kid, whatever, you know, well, if a cop pulls you over, make sure, you know, it's just like, make sure to turn on the dome light, don't make any fast moves. But it wasn't the same, right? You know, and
you were never, ever scared for your life when you got
of course not. And look, people, you know, I know there are people who honestly believe that aside from a few bad apples, that this is not happening. And look, you know, that could be possible, but my God, listen to all
we should not be able to have a conversation where we can just say a name and you're like, well, which one was that?
And this also, look, this isn't, I guess my thing is, this isn't like a conspiracy of people of color who are trying to pretend like they're singled out. You know, there's a reason why every black prominent, you know, actor, you know, educator, whatever, they've all got a story. They've all got a story, like every single one.
Of course.
And some of them, you know, most of them multiple stories. So, you know, if you've got a black friend, you know, they'll tell you, you know, it's like, this is not the exception. This is the rule. And that tells you that is a problem. Now, there are statistics. Yes, some of it's anecdotal, and statistics can be manipulated. The statistics aren't great. It's hard to judge statistics, you know, because we are complicated human beings with lots of things, and each situation is different. But on the plus side, we are having the conversation. We are having podcasts where we're supposed to talk about very silly things, and we are pausing to talk about these things.
Which I appreciate. I called you a couple hours before the show,
terrified
and
me.
let you know that I was having reservations at the time about doing the show this evening, just because at the time, especially, I was just taking in a lot of information, and it was just very overwhelming for me. And I wanted to make sure that we took some time out of this episode to kind of highlight some of these things. And I didn't feel like it would be right to carry on and ignore just, you know, horrible, terrible things that have occurred today and every day. And to acknowledge the fact that, we saw the video today. We saw the video last month and the one the month before that. But you know how many videos haven't been made for people? And that's the point should be emphatically screamed from the rooftop. If we're seeing one every month, how many do you think are happening every day in places where there are no body cameras? I'm from conservative Arkansas. That I'm born and raised, proud Arkansans, and I love my state. It's the natural state. It's absolutely beautiful. There are definitively a shit ton of racists there. There's also definitively a shit ton of amazing, progressive, wonderful people who only strive to create unity and beauty in this world, of whom I strive to be like every day that I can be. but there's, like you're saying, when you get pulled over and stuff as a white man, a cis white male, as the would be most politically correct in this particular moment. But like I've been, when I was I lived in Little Rock when I was a child. We moved when I was 9, and I went at that time. This was during, I don't know if you're an HBO guy, but Banging in the Rock was a big show on HBO back in the time. So that when that show aired, we had moved actually right before that because my neighbor got stabbed at his locker, doing whatever. So it was kind of, it was a rough time for Little Rock. It was, the crack in the 80s. It was, things were going down. But we moved from Little Rock where I was the only white kid, or me and my sister and my brother. We were the white kids. In my mind, I was like, went from being the only white kid at an all black school to being the only something at an all white school. I went there and I didn't fit in. And when I moved to an all white school in the middle of nowhere, it was quickly recognized by them that I was not white. I was something else. They're like, what? They're like, what you got? You got something in you. You ain't just white. You like got something. So I started, I had they couldn't figure it out. So like I was Fat Chink for a while because I was a little overweight. That was my most popular nickname in high school, was Fat Chink, because they thought I was Chinese, I guess. I don't know. But so, I've experienced I know kind of what both sides, because I'm definitely white passing for some people and I'm not for others. I don't understand the difference and why some people recognize it and some people don't. But I want to tell you a story about a time in which I was with a friend of mine. He was my roommate, and Little Rock is the major metro, and then you have a couple smaller counties that are highly populated due to what's called white flight in the 80s. Saline County and I don't know, there's other counties, but Saline County is where we were at. So me and my roommate, who's a 6'6" African-American gentleman at the time. He was great guy, sweetest guy you've ever met in your life. We met when we were bartending, or I was bartending, and he was a server at Red Lobster, and we hit it off and moved in together like 2 weeks later, and we're inseparable. But we were going to get a haircut at my brother-in-law's shop at the time in Bryant, Arkansas, and we weren't quite sure where we were going. And we're like, "Oh, is that it?" No, we knew it was close to the school.
1990s
or something. This was 2000 and.
So it's recent. The new millennium. Okay. 2009.
10 or 11 years ago. Or so. Yeah. So we're driving and we're trying to find this shop, and we're like, "Oh, there it is." It was behind us. We missed it. So there's a movie store, Movie Madness, I think it was called. And so we pulled into the parking lot of this store, as one does when they miss their turn to turn around. About 30 minutes later, 3 police officers show up to the beauty salon, and they're like, "Who's driving that silver? Well, which one of you guys own that silver Honda Accord outside?" And we're like, "Oh, that's us." I was in the chair and he was waiting. He's like, "Well, we got a report of a Mexican and a black guy that were casing a movie place over here. Said y'all look real suspicious." We were like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And I'd never been to me in that moment, it was the most blatant racism that I had ever personally experienced. But to see the anger in my friend's face and the sadness in his face, because this was not the first time for him, and this is and there's just so much shit like this that happens that people don't. I barely told the story to anyone in my life. But it's a thing that's happening. It's a thing that's happened. It's things that's happening every single day, and people are getting killed. And I'm beyond frustrated with it, and it's why. It's why I said I originally considered pushing the show, just because I didn't know that if I was going to be able to stay a clear focus on the issues of talking silly shit about candy and stuff. If
let
my
me
head
ask
was in
you
this
something,
other dark place,
because I think about this. I mean, look, this year, among everything else, obviously this has been an issue that any thoughtful person, any person with a heart, of any color, has had to consider, had to come to grips with. And, I've thought about it a lot. We have a lot of discussions here. My wife is working from, we've both been in our apartment, and we spent every hour for the last 6 months together. And so a lot of these conversations we have sort of end with, God damn, the world is fucked, but, and again, we're just two guys who are not a sociologist or, social scientists. But what do we do? Look, aside from teaching people to treat each other better in a broad sense, and that's a very broad thing, aside from which, one of the things that I think is always important, is education, right? Educate your kids, educate your cops, give them better training. But, and for this, unfortunately, this blunt phrase of defund the police, which sounds terrifying to someone clutching their pearls, but, makes sense if you hear about different things, it's, but I also understand, the resistance. If you're a police, look, I've worked jobs. I've never been a police officer, but you change the way one little, someone new manager comes in and wants to change something, I literally freak out, right? That's not the way we do things. Yeah. And
that's why you have to burn the whole system to the ground, because there's going to be so much. I mean, not like take it away, but like reimagine the way it is in terms of training.
No, look,
for me, that's
no. Look, I think,
but
I mean, I think the phraseology to burn the place to the ground is way too provocative.
Well, burn the infrastructure. I think that provocative statements are warranted here.
Yes,
but I think the system. I think it's important to understand that this is a structure. This is a systematic structure that exists, that is larger than life, that needs to be burned to the ground and rebuilt in a better image.
And I guess what I would say is this. No. Look, I've thought about this a lot. And I thought, okay, we live in a country that has this original sin of slavery, right? And all the problems, all the problems that have existed through today, right? From that. And, from general bias and racism and how we are structured as people, and to make quick decisions based on the things we see, right? This is how we are genetically built. But we can learn around that. Look, we're not victims of our genetic instincts, but so we can't burn the whole society down. So we're always going to have those systemic problems, those sort of generational problems coming in. And we live in a country, I guess the point I'm trying to get to, and again, not discounting, getting rid of everyone in a police force or starting from scratch and trying to figure out different ways to police, which I think, there's a lot of merit to that discussion, which is this. Yeah. We live in a country where we live in a world in a period in our technological evolution where, we have a Second Amendment in this country. And look, Second Amendment is as important as all the other amendments, right? And you may want to argue that, well, it's for, it was for muskets and it was meant for a militia. And I'm like, look, I get that's a fine debate. It's one you will never win, right? In this country, I think. So given that we have a right to these incredibly powerful things that are no bigger than this dumb piece of plastic right here, right? That a 12-year-old, my mother was shot by a 12-year-old kid like 30 years ago, right? With a rifle, with a .22. And almost died. And and didn't know him. She was out for a walk, right? This kid wanted to see what it's like to shoot a human being, to show you how fucked up, our world is. So we have these incredibly powerful things that we can carry around. In many states, we have the right to carry them concealed, but a lot of people have them. And, we do have criminals in this country. We do have crime, and we do have peace officers that are meant to go out there and patrol the streets and do these things. And I get that systemically that it's become something else in some cases. And finally, the point I'm trying to get to is this: at the end of the day, we have human beings doing these fucking jobs, and you can train the hell out of somebody. Yeah. And here's the interesting thing: you train somebody really well, like a cop really well, and then they become a sort of fixed given if they're trained really well. And I know that's what they try to train them so that, basically they want almost like an athlete, right? You come into a situation, you don't think about what to do. You just do it based on the training you've had. So if a person, reaches behind their back, right, you're going to shoot them, right? And maybe, you hope that you're trained to have better options, but that is a terrible freaking reality, right? And it puts cops in a bad position, puts us in a terrible position. And the other thing is too, I was listening to LeBron.
I don't know that there's any office, like, just to clarify, that there's any police department in this entire country that actively promotes shooting people unless they're have a gun pointed at them. That
maybe I misspoke.
That they're making this. No. I wanted to clarify that for you.
No. Look, this is not my field. So yeah.
I do appreciate you talking about things that are not necessarily.
So, but if you have really good training, you do become a fixed given, meaning, you're no longer judging things, but situations are so dynamic and so crazy. And they happen very quickly, we all have fight or flight. So someone gets pulled over by the cops, and let's say they have an outstanding warrant for fucking parking tickets. They're going to freak out too and get agitated, right? Their adrenaline's going to pump, and then they're going to behave. How do we make sure that someone who has freaking parking tickets doesn't get murdered because we're human beings and we have adrenaline,
Yeah. Because they don't want to go to jail for not paying parking tickets, because that's what's going to happen if you get. I've been to jail for not paying a speeding ticket for 2 years prior, before like 20 years
man.
ago.
And for the sake of discussion, for the sake of productive discussion or debate, I would say, even if your cop isn't a racist, even if you can say that he doesn't suffer from bias, shit, he's a human being, and we are deeply flawed. I've often said there are certain positions, there's certain jobs that require extraordinary human beings. And I'd say that's anyone who works at a retirement facility, right, for elderly folks, because you've got people at their most fragile, and they're losing their ability to do everything. And you have to have such an extraordinary level of patience. And that's a level of patience most people only have for the people they love most. But you have to have it for a bunch of people you don't love. And don't get me wrong, I think some of those people have that. They have that calling, right, who work in those facilities. But my God, that's an incredible ask. And a lot of people don't, because that's why you have elder abuse in these facilities, right? You have people getting really treated badly. I think same goes for teachers, and same goes for police officers. And look, man, you're just that many extraordinary people that can make great judgments don't exist. And I'm not saying that we should just shrug our shoulders. And I'm not saying that, but I'm saying we've got a lot of work to do, and I absolutely agree that, if we're really being honest, man, if we really want to live in a just society, like, we got to really look at this, but it's real hard, because there's a lot of power there.
It's not going to be comfortable.
And there's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of tradition. These people, look, police officers are very proud. And you know what? They deserve to be proud. Like, my teachers deserve to be proud, and
anyone doing their job correctly and to the betterment of society deserves to be proud for what they're doing. But when you don't acknowledge the flaws inherent in your profession, or make any effort to help change, grow, amend anything, then you become a person that's not worthy of that same admiration or respect. To me, you now are part of, if not the cause of the problem, because
you've circled back to sort of where we became, which is
in those positions.
Hey man, can you acknowledge your flaws? And look, I watch,
exactly.
Look, I follow the political the political Super Bowls that are happening every day on the news. One of the biggest problems I see now, you know, and I actually funny, I just had a friend tell me, they said the biggest problem that Washington has, they put C-SPAN, they put cameras in there, so you couldn't have the kind of, so all of a sudden everything was a show.
Yeah.
But it seems like any show of weakness, if you ignore, like, let's say I'm a Democrat, you know, it's an easy guess, you know, and let's say a Republican was going to do something I really disagreed with. Okay. And people were saying it. And then he said, you know what? I realized that was a mistake. I'm not going to do that. Do you think the Democrats are going to say, yeah, good for you, man. Great. Now they're going to say, look at him. Look at him. Yeah, he's an idiot.
No,
look, he was wrong. We're right. They're going to spike the football on him. So all of a sudden he's disincentivizing from even acknowledging his mistakes. And we want him to acknowledge his mistakes. You know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah, I think that's the biggest point that we could take from, you know, from this particular segment of this conversation is that, the ability to own up to your mistakes and not face just total
and it's
fucking annihilation.
And it seems like no one's doing that because we love to annihilate. And I don't want to separate, you know, the very balkanized political thing we have here. And I don't want to diminish the fact that a man was killed because it's a very different thing. But, you know, we do have, in order to solve these things, we have to be able to come together and have some kind of discussion, some kind of debate, and some kind of willingness to say, listen, you know, I'm going to give you a win because you decided not to do the dumb thing, you know. But, you know, again,
well, I think this is where people that have the ability to see things a little bit differently, like I think you do. I do. I know a lot of people that are, you know, understanding and taking all this in. It's our responsibility to actually be the facilitators of change, to kind of bridge that gap, because we can talk to both sides. I understand where you're coming from. I understand where you're coming from. Like I said, I was born and raised in the city, and then I moved to the middle of nowhere in the country. And then, you know, I got friends on both sides of this thing. And it sucks, but it's my responsibility to try to bridge that gap, because I do have a foot in the door. And every single person in this country that has that same experience right now, it's your responsibility. You're the one that should be helping usher this in. Not that we can change this on this podcast, or that you're going to have a conversation that's going to fix the world tomorrow. But until we all start having these conversations, need to have these conversations had with, then we're going to still be in the same situation that we're in right now.
That's certainly what I believe.
You know, anyone that has the ability to do this.
I believe that.
I don't want to spend too much. You know, we've talked. I wanted to spend the first 15 or so minutes to talk about this. We're 36 minutes in.
I told you, good luck
taking the time. No, it's great.
It's hard. It's hard not to. It's hard to not to talk about
over.
It, you know, it's hard not to have it.
It is
be everything. But let's, you know.
Okay.
All right.
Let's talk about candy.
Yeah.
And collecting of it specifically.
Yeah.
The art of collecting candy as your handle.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. Like, I wish I could go back and change the handle. When I launched my site, Collecting Candy, I like alliteration, and no one had the domain. So I thought, oh man, that's really good, Collecting Candy. But what you know, and don't get me wrong, I am a collector of candy wrappers and everything, but really what I'm chasing is not to have the biggest collection. It's to really create a history of this category of material and to celebrate that history. I'm not, don't get me wrong, you know, I am a lifelong collector. I collected comic books and action figures and toys. So I definitely have that malfunctioning gene in my brain that makes me, you know, I got them all, you know. But I've tried to temper it with a more noble purpose.
Educating people on the origins of candy.
Yeah,
so I did some research before, you know, once I knew I wanted to have you on because our mutual friend, Ty Miller, connected us. One of my favorite people who is, we've got a podcast that we're doing. He's going to be a co-host.
Oh my God, that's amazing!
And another gentleman, Herbie Gill. We're doing a podcast called Greatest Movie Ever, the podcast,
That's a good
where
name.
we discuss movies that have a Rotten Tomato score of under 50%.
Wow.
And we make the case for why it's the greatest movie ever.
God.
And I'm really, really excited to work with him and Herbie on that.
That's
I thought
great.
you might enjoy that as well.
Ty Mills makes me laugh all the time. He's so funny.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
Um,
He's effortlessly
but-
funny, it seems like. I was just like, how is he so funny?
he just exists in a world that is funnier than ours.
Yeah, he's got one of those great New York wits. You know, it's just like, oh man.
That's the thing. I'm immensely. I've loved New York City my whole life. I've been, I'm an Arkansan through and through. The Razorbacks and all this stuff. But I've been addicted to skylines. I love the way that skylines look. I love tall buildings, and at the more congregation of structures that you can put together, the happier I will be perusing it.
Cool.
So obviously New York City is the zenith of skylines in America, and so I always dreamed of being here.
So much.
And yeah, there's tons of it.
I've often said, if you believe in ley lines, these energy lines that crisscross the earth, and in witchery or whatever they always say, in mysticism, where ley lines cross and intersect, those are areas of power. They said ley lines cross at Stonehenge and so on. But I've always said, boy, if ley lines are real, they are all crisscrossing over like Manhattan. It's
New York
like,
City.
yeah.
The very first time I ever stepped in the city, I was like, I always knew I wanted to be. I was always drawn here from afar.
Yeah.
But the second I stepped in here, I just was overwhelmed with a sense of desire to create, to transform, to the energy is palpable in this city.
It's a rhythm.
If it's in your blood, it will boil.
I say I always used to say, and I still do, I would say New York City is a rhythmic thing. And that's why people who come with the right rhythm, internal rhythm, they really match with it, and it really fills them up. But if you come here and it's not your rhythm, it just wears you down. Like listening to a song that you can't
recover from it.
Like listening to a song you hate. People, some New Yorker told me, you either stay here 6 months, you stay here 6 years, or you stay here the rest of your life.
Yeah. But so
anyway,
speaking about that, I was like, he's a New Yorker through and through, and I was like, I'm so jealous of that. I want to be a New Yorker. I wanted to be born and raised here.
Oh my God,
that's what I always wanted.
It's I
didn't have a choice.
They are a very specific breed, those native New Yorkers.
They are.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of just tell us kind of your background, your story,
Sure.
just what's the some little high points, the things that we should know about you that makes you interesting and stuff.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was born and raised in Nebraska in the Midwest, which
So you're a Cornhusker.
Yeah, I am a Cornhusker. I love the Cornhuskers. I love them now more than I even did when I grew up there, just because it's a nice way to connect to where I grew up.
It's the best way to still have that, just like I'm the same way with the Razorbacks. I am immensely dedicated to watching every single game that they play in every sport, because I feel like I am in Arkansas and nothing has changed when I do that.
I agree.
For that 2 hours, 3 hours.
They were back before you could stream all the games and watch all the games. Like, I used to listen to them sometimes on like the radio or internet radio, and I loved it because they would still have like on the radio, you would get like the hog report still like at halftime. And I was like, oh my God, look at that. It's like the grains and corns are at this rate, I was like, oh, it's just like when I was a kid growing up. But
we get the Oaklawn track results,
nice.
race
good.
Results in Arkansas.
But when I lived there, I cared, but I didn't care that much. Like, I didn't really watch games, but boy, the last 25 years.
Did you go to?
I went to the University of Nebraska. Yeah,
Lincoln.
And I was a home
lovely town, by the way.
Yeah, no.
I love downtown Lincoln, and Omaha.
Oh, nice.
Arkansas. We're the Omahogs. We go there a lot, as you can see here with the baseball jersey.
Wow.
So I actually know Nebraska's a dear place.
Nice.
For me, so I've spent a lot of time.
Me too. But yeah, it's so it's I'm definitely yes, I'm a Cornish. So I grew up there. Went to college there. Went to the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and I grew up reading comic books, loving comic books. And when I was in college, comic books were sort of at their zenith, their apex of the early 90s. That was, I was sort of there through the direct market where it blew up to where all of a sudden everyone thought comics are the next big thing. They're selling 8 million copies. X-Men 1 came out. It sold, Death of Superman came out. So all these huge events that were making national news. And it was really this direct market, and collectors, and sort of like if you've seen baseball cards or Beanie Babies or any collectible that, or Tickle Me Elmo, people went crazy and they were buying, okay, I'm going to fill my basement with X-Men #1 and I'm going to pay my way through college or whatever with it. And anyway, so it was a very exciting time. I decided, oh, you know what? I don't quite know what I want to do with the rest of my life, but I would love to work in the comic book business. And, it's a longer story. I'll try to keep it brief. But basically, I had a friend who was a very well-respected retailer, comic book retailer, owned stores in Lincoln and Omaha, a guy named Brian Shore, who's an absolutely amazing dude. He was one of like the top retailers in the country. He was part of like special retail representative programs where they would fly him and like 15 other retailers out and they would sort of pick their brains, DC Comics. Anyway, he knew people. Yeah. And when I was graduating, he said, listen, man, there's more to it. But he said, if you want to work in the comic book industry, I'll introduce you to some people. And he did. And, I went to New York, Chicago. Went to Chicago Comic-Con in 93, met people at Marvel, met people at DC. And then, I made some phone calls and sent some letters and stuff. And then I came out to New York in October of 93 to try to meet people in person, just came out on my own dime. And I guess this one part of the story I will tell. I went to Marvel. They gave me a tour. The guy that I had met with in Chicago Comic-Con wasn't there, but I sort of got this flyby tour. It wasn't very great. They didn't really pay me much attention. And then I went over to DC, and they were very nice to me. And they said, well, you're graduating with a degree in marketing. No, I had graduated, actually. And I was still living in my college town. And they said, well, we're going to be expanding the marketing department here in the next few months. And we're going to be adding 2 positions. So when you get back to Nebraska, why don't you work up your resume and send it off to us and do that? So I was like, oh, well, that's exciting. And I'm going to tell this whole story because I think it's a great lesson, right?
Yeah.
Because it's one I've had to remind myself. Because I was, I don't know if I was bold, but I was eager and excited and optimistic. And now I would characterize it as bold, but I don't think I was that bold. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I go back to Nebraska and, I send him off my updated resume and I don't hear anything. So then I do the next thing. I'm like, okay, well, I've got their phone number. I've got their business card. I'm going to give them a call. So I call and I'm calling this guy. His name was Bob Wayne. He was the director of marketing at the time, director of sales marketing. And I call him, doesn't answer. I leave a voicemail. Okay, I don't hear back. So another few weeks go by and I was like, I'm going to give him another call. Just check in, right? So he said they were going to add these positions in the fall. So the months start adding up. It's now November.
Yeah.
Now it's December. I think in January I call again and I don't hear back. And I was like, okay. So finally in February, I think it might have been February, I call and I leave another voicemail and I'm like, listen, this is Jason Liebig again. It's like I'm the guy from Swingers. It's like, I don't know. It's like, so it's me again. So I call and I got to say, the funny thing is like a guy trying to ask out a girl for the first time. This is before cell phones. So I would sit there in my apartment in Lincoln, Nebraska, staring at the phone. I would pick it up. I would put it back. I would pick it up. I would put it back. So I was literally, I was like, because I just felt like that's the call where they're going to say, oh, who are you, dopey guy? And, and if I'm remembering correctly, well, it might have been the February call where I call and Bob Wayne answers the phone. And I had probably left him like 3 or 4 messages in the ensuing months. It might have been March. I might have left him another voicemail message. I'm not exactly sure, but it was probably February. And he answers the phone. And of course, I'm just freaking out, right? I'm sick to my stomach. He's like, yes, Jason. He's like, oh, because I think I'd said, like, I know you had filled the positions already. Oh, this is the message I left. Listen, it's Jason Liebig again. I know you said you were going to fill the positions by the end of the year, so I know those positions are filled. But listen, I've decided I'm going to move to New York. And I wanted to see if you could give me some advice on what I could do once I get to New York that would make myself more attractive as a potential hire. Right? It's very earnest, right? Very earnest for my young Nebraska boy self. And
you put
I did. No, I took a risk. I wasn't rude, I wasn't pushy. But I did what I did. I made the call. And anyway, so then I call him back and he answers and he was sort of a gruff dude. He's like, yeah, well, I got your messages, got all your messages. And I was like, okay. He goes, and the positions haven't been filled. I was actually in the hospital for a long time. I had some medical issues that had to be taken care of. I was like, okay. But he said, so you're moving to New York. He goes, when are you moving? I was like, oh, first week in April. He goes, when you get here, give us a call. Call Ann Ivan, who's the person right under him. And he goes, we'll set up a meeting. I was like, okay, well, look at that. And I'll never forget because, I was out. And the reason why I think this was a lesson for me. And I've always tried to tell the story with friends of mine, younger friends especially. And I said, I was out at a bar. And I was out at my friend Brian Scher, the comic book retailer's birthday party. He was having a birthday party at a bar, and I was out drinking. And one of our mutual friends, this really cool dude, right? And I can't remember the guy's name, but he was a cool dude. He was legitimate cool, right? Like he wasn't like, he didn't like, he was just like, oh, he was chill. He was cool. Like he dressed really well.
Like James Dean.
Yeah. Like he was like, yeah, but he might've been Persian or something. I don't know. He was like the Persian James Dean, right? I could have that totally wrong, but he was
James Dean, but
he was way
Farsi.
cool, right? And I was like, oh, this guy's so cool. So we're talking. He's like, oh yeah. And I said, and Brian's trying to get me a job at Marvel Comics or DC Comics. And he was like, oh yeah. Okay. And he goes, Brian told me he was going to get me a job with DC Comics. And I was like, yeah. He goes, yeah. Well, what happened? He goes, well, he introduced me to them. And I was like, yeah. And then what? Well, they never called. And I'm like, and that's it? You just left it at that? That was, I'm sort of sitting there. I'm like, and you just took that. Like that was your answer. They didn't call me after I met them. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, fuck man, they didn't call me either, but I called them. Right. Yeah. So, because I was trying to solve the problem. I always said, it's look, and I'm not great. Look, I'm not like Mr. freaking assertive, but I know if I want to, there's so many things. I don't want to read that particular email, but I'll read it, eventually. But if you really want to solve a problem legitimately, you're going to do everything you can to solve that problem. And so I was solving. So anyway, so jumping back ahead, I've been making these calls, putting myself out there. Bob Wayne says, oh, if you're going to move here, so I come to the city, sell my car, like a 69 Volkswagen Bug. I've been working on it, sell it. By this point, I knew I had like a second cousin, so I had somebody I could move in with, which,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, then they say if you can,
in New York,
when they tell you if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. What they're talking about is getting an apartment and a job.
Yeah. Do you have someone that you can stay
that's
with
it.
until you can land a place?
That's it. So I had the second cousin. I come here, I go in. I had made the mistake of eating like catfish the night before. I'm not a fish eater, but I'm allergic. So I didn't realize I thought I was allergic to like shellfish, but I was also, turns out I'm a kind of allergic to like river fish.
to
yeah. So I've got like hives and I put on my little, my little college guy suit, and it's April, but it's hot and humid as hell, right? It's New York City, April in 1994. Anyway, I go to the interview, I interview them. It goes pretty well. And how did it end there? Did we have a second interview? I'm trying to remember. I should have taken a journal. Anyway, so I either had another interview that I think I went in on a Wednesday and maybe they brought me back on a Friday, or maybe I just went in on a Friday. Either way, at the second interview, I'm in this conference room of this, and now where I'm in the Warner Brothers building. It was 1325 Avenue of the Americas, which I think is the same block as like the New York City Hilton, or it was.
One of my favorite avenues of
nice.
America.
And so you go into this building. Of course, I'm fresh off from Nebraska. It's just like I walk in, and I'm like, oh, this is my city now, right? This is great. You go in, and it was a Warner Brothers owned DC Comics, so it was Warner Brothers full. But I get off in the elevator, and there's this huge like chrome WB shield like on the wall right there, right? It's a DC Comics, boom, boom, boom. And I was like, oh my god, look at this. This is crazy. And I had seen it back in October. Don't get me wrong, but I'm still, I go into a conference room. They have me in there.
Now you're there officially.
Yeah, right now I'm like, no, I'm going in for a job interview. This is crazy.
Yeah, there's just one interview away from me being here.
So, so I get there and I go in and I'm sitting in this conference room. The funny thing about this conference room, there was a Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman costume on like a mannequin. There was plaster of Paris, like Clark Kent sitting at one of the conference room chairs. It was very funny. And if you were a comic book fan, it was glorious, right? I was like, oh my God. So I'm at this huge, 30-foot long table with just these people. They're asking me all these questions. I'm doing my best to, my best job interview. Anyway, Ann Ivan, who was directly under him. So whoever she hired would have been working directly for her. She walks me out. After the interview, she walks me out and she gives me this spiel, which to me was like, this sounds like a rejection letter. She says, listen, thank you so much for coming in. It's really great to meet you and talk to you. And I just want to let you know, we're going to talk over the next few days, but whatever we decide, I just want you to know we really seriously considering you. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know, and I left, did like a shot of tequila down at the bar, and my hives were all coming in under this necktie, loosening my necktie. And I really didn't think I got it. I go home, I get a call. Then the following Monday, I think, I get this call from Ann Ivan, lovely Ann Ivan. And she goes, hey, Jason, how you doing? And I'm like, great. And she goes, I've got some good news for you. And I'm like, you do? And she goes, you're in. No job title, no salary, nothing, just you're in. That was it. None of that stuff was mattered, right? We didn't discuss it. She knew I would take whatever they would give me. And it was terrible, by the way. Don't work in publishing. I think my starting salary was $22,500, you know. I mean, it was a different time, but not that different. Yeah. Anyway, so I got that job, and, you know, and so I started my career. And of course, that was a huge opportunity for me to get that job. You know, I think it's only become more competitive, but you know, a lot of people wanted to work in that industry then. It was hugely popular. It's like trying to get a job at MTV at the time.
Well, in the 90s. Yeah, in the 90s it was everything.
And so I got that job, and I worked.
When did Death of Superman come out? Sometime
it was before
after that, right?
I came in the wake of Death of Superman. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I guess.
Well, Death of Superman, I think, was 91.
I'm trying to remember how old I was when I was reading that.
And they did the Reign of Superman. Then they did Superman Blue and Red, long-haired Superman. There's a lot of Superman.
Crazy Superman. In the 90s.
Death of Superman, man. It's still a thing. They just did it in the movies.
Yeah.
You know? So I did that job for about a year and a half. I liked it a lot, but it still wasn't everything for me. I started to able to identify really what I was grooving on, what I wanted to do. I remember telling my boss, Ann Ivan, at the time, I just want to make things. I want to make something cool, either metaphorically or literally, and just want to be able to put it on a shelf and say, look, I made that. You know, wouldn't that be fun? And that's not what this is. You know, it's not. I said, you know. Anyway, so I ended up leaving, and there's more to that story too, but I won't bore you. And then I had a lot of friends in the comic book industry, because one of the best things about being one of the marketing guys at DC Comics, you went to every single comic book convention that they attended. So in the span of like a year and a half, I must have gone to like 30 comic conventions. I went to San Diego Comic-Con twice, Chicago Comic-Con twice, you know, and Motor City Con, Atlanta Dragon Con.
Is San Diego is it still like just the one?
I mean,
like, is
you're talking about 2020? You know, so far as like it.
Yeah, like now in today's time, is San Diego
here's
still like
here's the
one?
crazy thing. Like, Comic Cons in the 90s were pretty big. San Diego was by far the granddaddy of them all in the 90s. And it still is. I mean, you know, it's still the comic convention. But what's interesting about
it's the one you're going to release.
What's interesting about it is like how much comic book culture, not so much comic books themselves, comic book culture has become mainstream culture, pop culture. I mean, look, the biggest movies, right? You know, that's the simplest way to put it. And even if you're launching like a TV show that doesn't have a damn superhero in it, you're launching it like San Diego Comic-Con. You know, it's the convention hall's grown twice the size. And back in the day, I mean, Comic-Con was already like 30 years old in the 90s. But back in the day in San Diego Comic-Con, at the end of the con, all the kids or whatever went back to their hotel rooms or whatever, read comic books. And then we went downtown to grab food, but there were like 5 places. Now the entire downtown of San Diego is like this whole huge, it's a Hard Rock Hotel. There's parties, there's events. That really wasn't happening. There were some small events, but not to the level now. You can go to San Diego Comic-Con and never actually go to the convention itself, just because there's so much events, so much stuff to buy, so many industry things being set up outside. So, and for a while in the early 2000s, you know, running a Comic-Con was not easy. It was expensive. Some of them went out of business. But something started to change probably around between 2005 and 2015, where all of a sudden Comic-Cons became big business. 11 years ago, I think 10 years ago, 11 years ago, they launched the first big New York City Comic-Con. And Reed Pop, I think they've always run it. And their first year, because we didn't have a really big Comic-Con in New York, they launched that thing and it blew, like they had to, like I think the fire marshal had to come in and like stop them letting people in because they'd sold so many tickets. And now, as far as pure con attendees, people coming through the doors to go to the Comic-Con itself, physical Comic-Con, New York City Comic-Con has more attendees than San Diego. But San Diego is still a bigger event because, like I said, you could say there's maybe 50% of the people don't even go into the convention with a ticket.
Yeah.
So there,
It's like going to a football game in the South. You got 30,000 people outside tailgating that never step foot in the game. They're just there for the
That's
party.
a great comparison. Yeah, absolutely. It's like nerd tailgating.
Yeah.
I say that, I'm a nerd, first of all.
I'm a nerd too. So
but so Comic-Con's,
I think in this day and age, everyone's a nerd.
I would agree with
about
that.
something.
Nerd culture, geek culture has become a thing. You can be, a microbrew beer nerd. You can be anything. It's fandom, really. It's fandom, which is something.
Just an appreciation of life in a way that's unique to yourself.
I love authentic passion. I love authentic fandom. I have not worked in the comic book industry in 2 decades. Well, I have in some consulting things. I did some stuff for other publishers, but I just go to the people say, why do you go to the con if you don't have business there? I said, no, man, I go to see old friends. It's sort of like a high school reunion for me because I love all the people I work with. And it's also, you just get to see it. And you also just sort of, I wrap myself in the blanket of fandom. All these people who they don't want to work in the industry. They just love the stuff and they want to go out and they just want to be it. They want to be a part of it. So I love that stuff. And, because I am also a fan myself of so many things. And so I love those things. But yeah, so Comic-Con, great stuff. And jump back to 94, 95, whatever it was. I had made all these friends. And then I knew people at Marvel. I knew people at DC. And then I ended up getting a job at Marvel, which was the best job ever. Because I was doing what I wanted to do. I wanted to be part of making things. And I got hired on to the editorial staff of Marvel Comics, and
that's super.
And not only that, working on the X-Men. Which had you told me in 1992 that in 1995 I would be working on the X-Men, I'd say, you're out of your mind. And it was insane.
That was right at the time when the best X-Men TV series. That was a fabulous X-Men version.
You now have to pay Sony like a whole bunch of rights. Fox.
Yeah.
I think they're going to put that on something. I don't know if it's going to be on Disney Plus or whatever. I think they might already be.
I need it back so much.
I think they're doing a revival.
I can still see images.
I thought they were doing some kind of revival of that. Anyway, but yes.
I can still see Juggernaut hunkering down and charging at Wolverine in the city streets of something, and then Sabretooth in the snow.
That's so funny.
I still have vivid flashbacks of that.
Well, what's great about it is up until then, in the cartoon series based on comic books, they didn't really do the comic books in cartoons. They just did sort of cartoons. They used the characters, they used the sort of conceit of superheroes. But if anything, you were getting stories that were more.
I enjoyed that. Though.
But once they did that X-Men cartoon, boy, they pulled whole storylines. They adapted whole sophisticated storylines right out of the comics. Mm-hmm. And did not pay Chris Claremont for the privilege. Poor Chris Claremont.
Thanks for writing.
Thanks for writing that. We're just going to take that.
It's canon now. So
they did give him credit finally. There's a whole story there. Chris Claremont. But so I got to work on the X-Men and I made bold decisions in that. I went in for the interview thinking I was going to meet, someone says, well, you come in. I made a call. They're going to see you to interview for editorial. I was like, wow, that's amazing. Okay. I thought I was going to go in and meet with Human Resource. I go in, I'm meeting with the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. And the guy was also the X-Men editor at the time, this guy named Bob Harris.
Oh, wow.
And he asked me I'll never forget the questions he asked me because they were pretty good. He said, what do you think makes a good comic? And what do you think makes a bad comic? And I had an answer. And I do remember what both answers were. One of them was this Superman comic that Mark Waid had written. I said, Superman's such a tough character, but he came up with this great way to put Superman in this sort of can't must situation. And I thought it just really did everything that he cares about. But I said, bad comic, I said, and I literally attacked exactly what his office was working on right at that minute. I said, and this was I was taking a swing, right? I said, well, I gotta say, when I think of bad comics, I go, you guys are doing a thing right now called Onslaught. Onslaught was a thing where they turned Professor Xavier sort of into this big villain, right? He was the big bad. And I was like, he's big, super powerful, whatever. And I said, listen, when I read about this, I read the previews, I read the, things, I was like, man, this sounds terrible. And I said, and DC had just done it a year before. They had just turned Hal Jordan, who's the original Green Lantern. They had turned him into the big bad named Parallax. where he kills all the other Green Lanterns and he goes insane with power and he becomes the big bad. Ruined this great character. I said, listen, man, my first impression of this thing when I read it, I said, this was a bad idea. And it was a bad idea when they did it with Hal Jordan and Parallax. And I said, and so they've got some work ahead of them if this isn't going to be awful. And he looked at me, and this is where I think I got the job, because he looked at me and he goes, he was quiet, right? Because I literally attacked his fucking thing. And he goes, yeah, that was my first impression of it too. And I think, I think I got the job.
Take the swing.
Yeah. And I think and 6 months later, I got hired, and I can't tell you the insane level of euphoria of feeling like I had won the lottery when I got the call that I got that job, being a fan, being passionate, loving.
There's nothing like being able to connect and contribute to a thing that is like in your blood. It's just there. The feeling is just intense, and it's so rewarding every single second.
It just didn't feel real,
which is why I love creating my own properties. Like I only work for myself if I can help it, because I get to experience that every single second of the day if I'm doing it correctly.
All risk.
I've never been a super great employee because I have a shit ton of ideas, and I'm ready to show you how to make your thing better the second I walk in the door.
People don't want to hear that,
didn't
man.
Ask me to, so.
People don't always want to hear that.
What are you talking about? I'm like, well, I noticed a shit ton of issues on the way in, and I just wanted to know how you felt about changing everything. Yeah. Oh, you don't want to do that? Okay, well, I'll go. Yeah. It's fine.
That's been a lesson for me as a consultant. Like, I'm a terrible consultant because I'll be like,
because you have to like let them have their fucking way.
Yeah, there's people that won't talk to me anymore because I'm like, you are all wrong.
Yeah, everything that you're doing right now is the worst thing I've ever heard.
I try to temper all of my instincts now.
I like that you brought up Green Lantern. The first comic book that I ever owned was a second issue, the second issue ever of Green Lantern that I got at a yard sale in Mount Ida, Arkansas in 1990.
So second issue with that, which
25 cents.
Which version of Green Lantern? The 60s Green Lantern, like the Silver Age, or more of
the 60s Green Lantern? Yeah, Silver Age.
That's pretty cool.
And I was just like, I didn't know anything about it at the time. I was just like, this is super cool. It was like, the second, it was like, issue 2 or whatever it said. I don't remember. It eventually just, didn't survive childhood. Just like all the other extremely valuable toys that I own, Transformers and He-Man and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and whatever else that I ripped the arms off the Skeletor and Castle
Grayskull, man.
Whatever.
Sure, and Snake
Grayskull.
Mountain.
I got that for my 6th birthday at Showbiz Pizza.
Oh yeah, Showbiz, man. That was my jam.
Back in the day.
That was my jam. Now I'll tell you what.
I would go to my birthday every year.
You screwed up because I'm telling you, boy, the He-Man collectors, they are on fire. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like,
trust me, I had all of them. I had every single one of
that stuff is still serious
because it was my passion. I used to, I grew up in the South, so we were religious at the time. And I remember like every night I would pray. I'd be like, please, dear Jesus, can I have every single Transformer and every He-Man and every GoBot?
Of course, man. I only know GoBots because the thing is, I'm a little older than you, and GoBots and Transformers and He-Man, that stuff was all a little past my day.
It's like Power Rangers for me. Was like I was a teenager at the time, so it was like I know it, but I wasn't.
But I was a big fan of Nestle Quick. Like I've always had a sweet tooth. Like, and so there was a contest on Nestle Quick, a GoBots contest, to win like every GoBot toy. And of course, I didn't care. I didn't care about GoBots, but I got the thing, and I opened one up. It says you won first prize. And this was the first time, and I don't know, I was 14 or 13. This is the first time that I learned that first prize is not grand prize.
Not the grand prize.
Because you think first prize, well, that's the first one. I just won every GoBot.
Sounds great.
What the fuck are GoBots? But I won. Again, I know exactly what it is because I still have it in the box. I won a Boomer messenger vehicle. I think I did. I think some guy tried to buy it from me once and then didn't. Maybe I sold it. I don't think so. I think it's still boxed up somewhere at my mom's house. So a Boomer messenger vehicle, which was cool. It was this little thing, and it shot ping pong balls out of this little thing that popped up, and it was really neat. Anyway, yes. So GoBots, yes, the Transformers, man, but all that stuff is good. Like He-Man. I think Kevin Smith is producing or show running a new He-Man show, I think.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I cannot wait. Kevin Smith is a like personal hero of mine. He's one of my favorite human beings alive. I also happen to.
He's a good energy dude.
I cosplay as Silent Bob whenever I can, and I do an extremely.
Kevin Smith is he's a good dude. I don't think I've ever met him, but I have common friends who've worked with him a lot, and I love them. And look, how can.
I love the whole View-esque universe.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. It's just like he's oddly like a guy because he's like a very like obviously he's worked on a lot of Hollywood stuff and everything, but he's oddly like an outsider still, which is
and it's him, and it's just like whether it makes money or doesn't make money or people like it or don't like it, he's like, I made this thing and I love it. If you like it too,
and that's the thing too. He is not jaded at all because you can see him like. He got to like direct an episode of Supergirl or something, right? And he's like, I'm so excited I get to direct Supergirl. It's like,
oh, he's such a fanboy, which is what I love him most. Is like he lets his emotions out. He's like, and then now, he had this heart attack scare, and now he's like so rejuvenated to create, and I love it because give me content.
So he's doing that. What didn't they just have like the what is the Mubi place, the fast food place? They just did a pop-up in LA, and I was like,
Movies. Yeah, Movies is going to pop up in Red Bank, New Jersey, near the Quickie Stop here. I don't remember the exact date.
We'll
it's
talk,
coming soon. I've got it in my calendar somewhere.
I got to get there.
I'm going to be there.
I'm all about the packaging, so I need to get like my my Movies like burger box and fry box and everything. Yeah,
golden calf.
So that's very big. Okay, so you asked me like an hour and a half ago, like how I started. Anyway, so I worked at Marvel Comics.
Yeah. This is still for the listeners at home. We're still on background / story.
Like I said, my background, I could tell a story, and then like Marvel, I was there through 2 years of bankruptcy, and I know many, many stories no one knows about, the whole corporate upheavals and everything, and the sort of general mythology is that comic books were so bad in the 90s that Marvel went bankrupt. Don't get me wrong, there were a lot of bad comic books in the 90s, and I worked on some of them. I helped make some of them, but they were publishing way too many at one point. God, I think Marvel was publishing like 140 books a month. There's not that much talent out there.
It was just like get content out any way we possibly can. We don't care what it is as long as it has our name on it.
But the bankruptcy was not Marvel Comics' fault. The bankruptcy, not to bore your people, it's like all of a sudden I'm doing Star Wars episode 1. We're going to talk about the Trade Federation. The kids will love it. There's a trade disagreement. We'll send our Jedi to negotiate it. Anyway, so Ron Perlman, not from Beauty and the Beast, not from the City of Lost Children or Hellboy. Not that Ron Perlman. Ron Perlman, corporate raider, the guy who owns Revlon, and
so not Ron Perlman.
No, yes, Ron Perlman, who I actually saw once. I was flying up to Syracuse, New York, and I was on the same flight. And I was like, it's Ron Perlman, Hellboy.
That's my favorite Ron.
He's
Perlman.
Ron Perlman's great. Anyway. So I can say lots, but Ron Perlman, the corporate raider, is a terrible person by comparison. Yeah. I once heard a story about Ron Perlman. Like a woman was going up in the elevator, and he and his goons came into the same elevator, and he was smoking his big fat cigar, and she goes, "There's no smoking in the elevator." She tells that to Ron Perlman, and he literally took a big drag and just blew it right in her face, and didn't. I don't think that's his only one. Anyway, so he owned Marvel, and one of the things he did was he took, in bankers' terms, he took the equity of Marvel and borrowed against it, right? Like you would a house. So he essentially took multiple mortgages out on Marvel's value to buy other companies, and the stockholders let him do a lot of really stupid stuff. He bought Welch Publishing, which was sort of a failing publishing endeavor from a buddy of his, for $50 million. He bought Fleer for $250 million, Fleer trading cards, Fleer candy, which I'm going to, and then like a few years later, they bought Skybox too for another like $200 million. So you bought Fleer, now you're buying Skybox. It's like, man, you spent like $500 million on trading card companies in the last 5 years. That was a fucking mistake. Anyway, so they had $750 million of debt, $750 million in debt. And, you know, yeah, and they had made, and the funny thing was, because of the X-Men cartoon, the only place they were making money was on the toys, right? But here's the problem. Some genius at Marvel made a deal with Toy Biz. People made all the Marvel toys. They said, you don't need to pay us royalties. You just give us a percentage ownership in Toy Biz. And Toy Biz is like, okay. So Toy Biz gave Marvel like, I don't know, 5 or 10% of their company. But then Toy Biz was like, oh my God. So basically Marvel gave away 90% of their revenue on their biggest selling thing in the 90s because those toys sold. So they lost that revenue. And, you know, the problem was at a certain point, they just couldn't make the loan payments. They couldn't make their monthly payments on their loan on $750 million. And that is ultimately why they had to go into bankruptcy restructuring and so on and so on. It wasn't exactly that the comics weren't selling well. The comics did not kill them. It's just they weren't successful enough to pay that much interest, you know? And then anyway, so in the year 2000, Joe Quesada and Marvel Knights came in and Bill Jemisek was president. And I was very vocal. By this point, I'd been promoted a couple of times and I was always sort of outspoken and always sort of spoke my mind. And I really did to these guys. And famously so, I'm sure you could Google it. Most of it's true. And I really told these guys what I thought of their ideas, and which I'd always done since that first job interview, right? I told Bob Harris, I said, I don't think this is a bad idea. And I told these guys their ideas were bad. And it turns out the new president, the new editor-in-chief didn't want any of their people to tell them their ideas were bad. So they showed me the door soon after. And then I became a film and television producer for a company called Distant Corners, right as the internet bust happened. And I literally negotiated my salary, went home to Nebraska for the holidays, telling everyone I'm going to return to New York to be a big-time producer. And the week in February when I was supposed to move into my office, John Hegeman, the guy who hired me, says, hey, man, this thing says, dude, wants to download multiple files. I'm going to allow that. So John Hegman, who is famous for, he's the guy who came up with all the viral marketing for the Blair Witch. And he was a producer and he'd come from Orion Pictures. He'd done a lot of stuff and he's been doing stuff since. Anyway, great guy, John. And I call him up and he calls me back and he's like, I have to retract the job offer. And, you know, at this point, my life in New York had been sort of like a dream, right? I work for DC Comics. I'm a marketing guy, you know, entry level. Then I go to work for Marvel. I'm working on the X-Men. It's like, and I get promoted. It's like, oh my God, my life is charmed. And then I go, now I'm going to become this big time Hollywood producer. I'm going to work in film and television. My God, you know, this is crazy. This is crazy.
You're literally living the Jefferson's life. You're about to move to that big sweet.
I always thought of Michael J. Fox in Secret of My Success, right? Because I always thought I was tricking people. You know? I was like,
yeah, you weren't actually as good as you thought that they thought you were.
Right. I was like, no,
that.
You know?
The old imposter syndrome.
So that happened. And then, you know, everything sort of changed and I went to LA, but at that point, boy, everyone was gutting their internet divisions, their publishing divisions. Like the best way for me at that point to transition into film and television, because I wasn't that interested in staying in comics. A lot of people, once they get into, well, back then, a lot of people, once they got into comics, this is a broad generalization, but a lot of people really tried to stay in comics, at least some did. And I was like, man, you know, I was working on the X-Men. Like DC wasn't going to have me back. And there was really no place for me to go that would have been up. And so I went to LA and I met with friends at Sony, met with friends at a Sci-Fi Channel. I think my microphone keeps like leaning up on me. It's like my whole apartment. So like, what was it? My friend at Sci-Fi Channel, when Sci-Fi Channel Online, before they became Sci-Fi, Sci-Fi Channel Online, I think had like 200 employees, their online division. That's crazy. Yeah, like this is 99. Like they launched, like I'll never forget. I went to the sci-fi.com launch party. Boy, the people were burning a lot of money on this whole .com thing initially and famously, right? I can't remember who the famous DJ was. The DJ at this party, there were like models there. It was like, you know, like open bars and everything. Everybody was dressed better than me. I'm a notoriously bad dresser, I think. Yeah, no, who was it? I'm not, because I didn't know DJs at the time. I wasn't hip. But But yeah, it was quite an experience. Anyway, so my friend, he's like, oh no, man, they just like laid off like 190 people. Sony, I went to the Sony lot, met with a friend there who was not helpful at all. Scott, he wasn't helpful, and pretty much no one. And then I was on the beach, and a friend of mine's like, hey, you know, I dated her friend, and she was out there. And I was like, oh, maybe we get together and have a drink. And she goes, oh, I'm busy, whatever. But she goes, we were just talking, and she's like, oh, well, you always talked about going back to try to be an actor because it's stuff I did in college. And she goes, why don't you do that? And so I was like, oh, yeah, man, I don't need money. I don't need stability. Fuck it, right? I'll go be an actor. And I came back to New York, and I became an actor and a bartender, and did that for a long time, and did a lot of indie things. I worked a lot, never on anything of any note, not really. And then I sort of fell into some writing opportunities, and almost hosted a show for Spike TV. Then I nearly sold a TV movie to Disney TV, and but I just kept. Oh my god! No, quite. I was the king of like this Spike TV gig, man. It was before Chris Hardwick and the Nerdist and all that shit. Spike TV was going to do like a geek show. They were calling it Geek Ray Vision. And I'm like, well, fuck, man, this show was made for me. Like I literally made these comics you're talking about, right? Yeah. I know everybody. So I go in, and the first time we went in, and auditions, for those listening don't understand, like auditions, you can have like hundreds of people in to audition for these, and that's what they had. So you go in and you'd see the sign-in sheet. Boy, it was like pages long. And I go in there, and it's sort of like they're just talking about stuff, and I'm able to riff on everything they said, right? Because I'm a jabberjaw, so and I loved all this stuff genuinely. Like I actually loved comics, right? And comics were not what they've become. Yeah, like there were no, and so it went great. Then they had me back again. Then they had me back again. Then they had me back again. And I think like the fourth or fifth time they had me back, that sign-in sheet was my name and one other entry. And the other entry were two guys. And it was like there was a week-long blackout in the city that like during that week. So I was dealing with no AC, like I had no internet. But I go in, I showered up, took a cold shower, whatever. And I go in for this final interview, and I did great. And I had a manager at the time, and but I'm sitting across from these guys who've got like a fucking guitar cases, right? And I'm like, what the fuck is this? Like these guys have guitar cases? Anyway, so that must have been like a Thursday or Friday. The following week I get a call. It's like my manager calls me. Well, they love you at Spike TV. I said, look, I know they love me. We've been having the most, like I go in there, I was like hanging out with my best friends. They laugh at everything I do. Yeah, no, they all laugh. They all say, I'll never forget the first audition. It was like, okay, they said, what did they say? They said flamethrower, machine gun, or sword, right? This is like they would throw these things. I was like, I would have a machine gun with a sword on the front and a flamethrower attached underneath. And and they're like, oh, that's amazing. It's pretty, I think it's a low hanging fruit. But anyway, they loved it. But anyway, so I get this call. She goes, they love you. And I said, well, she goes, but they offered it to the musical comedic duo. I was like, fucking A, man, great. So then, but she goes, but they want to start shooting next week, and the musical comedic duo are on tour. And if they can't get out of their tour dates, you're the guy.
Now, was this what musical?
I can't remember. I'd seen one of the guys later on do like an episode. No, God, no. I mean, I would have been flattered if it was those guys. No, because I thought, I was like, when I first saw Flight of the Conchords, I was like, those motherfuckers. No. That stole my life. Bitches. Right.
Fuck y'all, but I love your show.
No, but I did see like one of the guys I would see on 30 Rock, and did something. And here's the thing. I watched like the first couple of episodes they did, and I was pretty clear at this point what I could do and what I couldn't do and how I did it. And I never forget watching the episode because they went to Dark Horse Comics and they were meeting with Mike Richardson talking about Aliens versus Predator and all this other stuff. Whatever. And, and I watched it and I was like, man, I know I would have done a better job. I would have presented everything better. I think I would have been better, except for like the last 2 minutes, they did a song about everything they saw in the episode. And I was like, I said, man, they crushed it on that song. And so I knew right then that they, that's how they got it, because I'll tell you what, they like, I thought the episode was kind of and then they got to that and I was like, oh my God, that's so good. What they should have done is just hired all three of us,
Yeah. Let you tell all the good stuff.
At any rate, that didn't work out. And then like with the TV movie at Disney, I had a partner who had already sold them some things out in LA, and we were partnering on a couple of things, which was great because that opened those doors for me. And then we were creating a musical Halloween movie to replace, they had like a thing called Halloween High or Halloween Town High, and they were looking for a replacement. And yeah, I came up with a pitch. My partner put a few tweaks on it, and then they loved it. And these were I'll never forget, because I was like, my wife now, but my girlfriend at the time, I was like, these are the Disney Channel original movie people. These are the guys who did like High School Musical, which was like the biggest thing in the world at that point, and Camp Rock. Mm-hmm. So I started to watch. I watched like all these kids shows too. I started watching all these Nickelodeon shows and stuff. Yeah, no. So I watched High School Musical. I watched Camp Rock. I watched all this stuff, primarily so I wouldn't accidentally like steal the plot lines of their things. Because honestly, one of my pitches was like, don't tell anybody, but that's kind of the plot of Camp Rock too, and we're still doing that. And I was like, oh, damn.
What's like? I used to always make a point to not like. I don't ever like to be influenced by other art, so I make it like if I'm creating something, I make a point to black myself out from that art. But like early on, and then I realized that there's a lot of unintentional plagiarism that occurs when you don't allow yourself to see what else has already been done. And then if you do that, you can challenge yourself to create something much better. And
I was
anyone.
Yeah. And so one of the things when that happened, like I had to redo everything, and we sort of started from scratch, because what I had originally pitched them was a thing that I loved, which was sort of influenced by, I originally created it as like a cartoon. It was sort of like Scooby-Doo meets the Partridge Family, meets X-Files, and it was close to my heart and whatever. I did all this thing. But then when I came up with the other thing, I was like, well, now I came up with some stuff that meant a lot to me. But I was more mercenary at this point. I was like, listen, this is an opportunity if I could sell them something. So for a year, I was working on revisions, and then I'd have these phone meetings, we'd conference in, and, it was going. There was a point, I want to say maybe halfway through, because what he had come up with was a young girl, an adolescent girl. She was our lead, and she had developed like these mystical powers or whatever, right?
Of course.
And the conceit was,
as girls are oft to do.
Yeah. The conceit was, and I think I can say this because whatever, it's never going to be a thing. She was the last of the sirens, right? All the sirens had been hunted, and the whole thing was sirens, because it was supposed to be musical, right? Yeah. Sirens, their basically ability to create magic is unlimited depending upon the song they sang, right? And I was like, that was my whole thing. And I based her, partially on my grandmother who had passed away a few years earlier, and I did all this stuff. And I'll never forget when Rena Singh, I think was the executive there at Disney at the time, who I was working with a lot. She said, you've created an amazing Disney character, like an amazing Disney. And you hear that, man, I was like, oh my God. And so my girlfriend and I, my wife now, we're at Target, and there's like all this High School Musical merchandise. And I'm like, baby, get ready. We're going to Hollywood in like 3 months. This is it. And it goes up. There was and as with all TV shows, there are a million different shows. There are a million different ways shows get made. There is no rote way. I mean, there are, but it always happens differently.
Yeah. And
in this case, it went through the process. It went all the way up to the head of the network, and as this sort of elevator pitch development outline. And he's like, okay, put it together, bring our writers in. So at that point, as my partner described, we became sort of executive producers, and they brought in the Disney TV writers to write. And people who I think had worked on the Tarzan TV series, who were their showrunners. And the first meeting with those guys, I was like, and I remember hearing it, I was like, oh man, they sort of pulled the heart out of it, and I was like, the gimmicky shit they're coming up with, I don't really like. I didn't say that.
Yeah.
Because at this point I was not speaking my mind, right? I was just like, man, do it, get it done. All I was cheerleader.
Like literally anything you can do to get me on this thing and make me all that money that you're getting High School Musical.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I just wanted to, because an opportunity like that gets made, all of a sudden you can get other things done.
Now that's what, for every creative, that's all we ever dream of, is that we have one major project that can actually finance the things that we really like.
Yeah. And then, and the way the world works, those things matter. They do, they do open up doors for you. So anyway, so now when those writers came in, it went back to the bottom and sort of started the process over again. That first meeting, but then the second meeting where they came in and they'd sort of taken their notes from the network and everything, and they had brought in the second thing. I was like, oh wow, okay. Then I was like really blown away by their second thing. So, and I think the third major and final conference call that I was conferenced into was about a year from the beginning of this whole process. And it was with the head of the network and everything. And this is the crazy, like cliched Hollywood story. I just think it's very funny and silly, and it sounds made up. Because it sounds just so Hollywood, like so cliche Hollywood, where my partner who was driving into Burbank is speakerphone while he's driving. He's like, listen, you may hear some things about Twilight today. And I was like, oh, that's weird. So to put it into perspective, I don't remember exactly whatever year we were developing. At the beginning of that year, High School Musical was the biggest thing for tweens, right? But by the end of the year, it was Twilight. Twilight was a monster. It was a tidal wave of like success. And so all of a sudden that's what everyone was thinking of, right? They want
shiny vampires.
So, and I'm like, I was making this silly, wholesome, monstery, kind of silly musical thing, but okay. So he goes, don't be unnerved if you hear things about Twilight. I'm like, okay, whatever, man. So I'll never forget. I'm in my living room. My wife was home. It might have been whatever day it was. I think she might have been getting her master's degree at that point. Anyway, so she's home because I wasn't alone. I've got the speakerphone on and we're going to this meeting, and I hear the two Tarzan writers and whoever the executive was, the guy, the network head or whatever, he goes, so how do you see the music? And this is true. This is an actual quote. Do you see it more Broadway or do you see it more Twilighty? And then, as you might expect, people, well, definitely more Twilighty. It was,
whatever you want to see.
You can't make this up. And I remember looking over at my wife, who had read the Twilight books, right? She was my window into Twilight. That's the only reason she understood it all. And I'm looking at her and I'm like, I don't get it. And that was the sort of end of that. And then like a week or two later, I heard, well, they didn't greenlight it, to go into production, but they're going to talk.
They wanted more Broadway.
They wanted more Twilighty. But what the fuck does that even mean about music? How do you see the music?
Is there even a musical?
Yeah, like Twilight isn't a musical, dude. Anyway, so it didn't make any sense to me. But again, I don't, who knows what they're thinking. Maybe they'd already decided they didn't like it and they were just fucking with us.
I mean, they got the money to spend to fuck with people.
Like I just did, 40 kilos of Coke, man. Watch what I do now. Like, how do you see the music? Like, do you see it more Twilight? I don't even know what Twilight is. Twilighty. So that didn't work out. And then a few years later, like one of the film execs really liked it. She was like, she pulled it off the shelf and she goes, I think I'm going to take this and pitch it to one of our, the writing program, like their up and coming writers. So they were going to pitch our dusty script to the writing. But then that was the last that ever happened of it.
Yeah.
And the thing I hate about that story is when I would tell it to friends or people I knew, whatever, and they were just asking me how things have been going and stuff, I knew that some people thought I was just bullshitting, right?
Yeah, because it never happened.
Because I'd had friends that had been notorious bullshitters. And, I'll never forget, I was with another cool friend, took me to a really cool party. I'm meeting his cool friends. And the thing...
Were they Persian, though?
Maybe. Eurasian.
Eurasian, okay.
But I'll never forget, he introduced me to this guy. I was like, oh, what are you working on? Because he was an actor and stuff. And he was like super Joe Cool, good looking dude, whatever. And I said, oh, yeah, this is Jason. This is my friend Jason. He just sold the pilot to HBO. And I'm like, what? Like inside my inner monologue is like, what the fuck? like I don't need to lie. I get it. I'm not impressive, but I don't need to lie about it. Mm-hmm. And I'd had a few drinks or whatever. And I literally was dumbfounded. I was speechless. And he goes, so what's that like, man? And I just this funniest thing, you literally couldn't make this up. I was like, I just sort of like played like, I don't know, I was like high or whatever. Right? I was like, I don't know. He goes, I get it, man. I get it. Like, talk about secret of my success, like faking your way through. I'm like faking this.
Yeah.
So I always knew that. I was like, listen, what do I have to show for it? You know, it's like, it's not like they give you a gift certificate. It says, hey, we almost made your pilot or whatever. We almost made your TV.
Congratulations. Here's a participation certificate.
And I always said, you know, when I was auditioning a lot as an actor, people would say, well, I couldn't stand the rejection. I said, man, the rejection is easy.
That's the best part.
Yeah, like I could go on 1,000.
That's how you learn to make.
Yeah, man.
Shit.
Like you could go
reject me 100 times so I could know what.
It's fun, right? Like you give me 10. If I could go on 100 auditions a week, I get to perform 100 times, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
it's easy. But what's soul crushing is the lack of rejection. Right? I always said I equate auditioning to dating, right? And it's like, well, you could go on a date.
That's when they ghost you.
You know, it doesn't work out. That's fine, right? But like, I don't care. Like, you know, maybe I wanted to go out again, but you don't. That's fine. We went on one date. Who cares? But then when they say, "Oh, I
pretend that you loved it,"
right,
and talking me up, and then just blowing smoke up.
When you've spent a year with them, like, and they're about to, like with Disney TV, I was like, "Oh fuck, man, we're going to the altar. We're going to church. We're gonna get married."
Yeah, this is happening.
And then when they say, "You know what? Well, let's not get married," and it's like, then that crushes you. And it was sort of a similar, albeit a much more compressed time with the Spike TV thing. So getting so close, like getting as close as you can get without going into production, that's oof. And I know that there are bigger actors that go through that all. I heard like what they do for soap operas is insane. Or back when they had a lot of soap operas, they would literally audition people in LA and New York. And this is, I don't know if you've ever heard this, for the contract player, if you're going up for a major role in a soap opera, what they would do is they would get the two final people and they would offer them both contracts. And they would have to negotiate the contracts and sign the contracts for both. And the reason they did that is because they're cheap motherfuckers, because you couldn't play, you know, you knew that there was one other person. So if you played too hardball, they were just going to go with the other person. And,
so they got them both cheap and then cut one.
And then later on, when I would do my show for Travel Channel, which ended up going on to Cooking Channel, my pilot, you know, it was not a dissimilar experience, but it was one that we actually went into production. We actually got aired and everything else. And so I actually can show that to somebody. I said the great thing about that is, even though it was heartbreaking that we didn't get to go forward with it beyond what we did, is that it aired, people saw it, you know, it was really good.
What is that? Is there a way to check it out if the listeners wanted to go?
Unfortunately,
and find it?
not. They don't stream it. I mean, I've streamed it personally for friends, but
yeah,
I think there's footage that I posted to collectingcandy.com on the about page. So I think there's a way to see some clips that, you know, Cooking Channel has never come to me.
We'll track it down, or
I'll send you.
I'll convince him to give me the footage. Yeah, and then we'll put it available for our paid subscribers or something.
But then that.
All right. So this seems like a natural time.
By all means,
to take a commercial break, and I can talk about things that would pay the bills as soon as we actually get commercials. So we'll cut it from here and
handing it over to Kennel Ration, the dog food that makes your dog happy.
Are you constipated right now?
No, it will naturally. It will be things like this. It's like, are you looking for the best hosting for your podcast? Come on to Zenith Hosting. Sorry.
No, that'll work. All right, and we'll be right back after this. Were you just listening to a podcast and would like to continue listening to said podcast? Try part 2. Up next.